Hello, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this Euroclima side event towards an inclusive energy transition, integrating all into a sustainable energy future in Latin America and the Caribbean. My name is Horst Pilger, and I will be moderating this session today. I will be speaking in English, but don't you worry. I think most of our panelists, if not all, will be speaking in Spanish, and we have live interpretation. So what's the objective today? The objective is to discuss with energy experts, to hear about concrete examples from their experience, and to get recommendations on the importance of ensuring a green and just or inclusive transition from different perspectives. So how we will do is, we will have a first round of questions to each panelist, where we ask him or her to reply to us in 5 minutes. Then we will summarize and have a second round, hopefully a bit shorter. And in the end, we will also announce a study that we will have carried out under the Euroclima program. We will be sharing a link to this. Why is this such a relevant topic today? Well, to quote from the Energy Outlook document that the International Energy Agency published recently, which said on the LAC region, that Latin America and the Caribbean has one of the highest levels of income inequality in the world. This is evident in the energy-related emissions profile, in which the richest 10% of the population account for 40% of the total emissions, while about 17 million people in the region remain without any access to electricity. So a just transition calls for universal access to modern energy at affordable prices and should involve communities and ethnic groups. Half of the countries in the region have pledged to achieve net zero emissions by mid-century or later. And the Latin America Energy Outlook 2023 also emphasizes optimistic prospects for the regional energy sector. So leadership in the global transition to zero emissions is anticipated, but social equity is crucial, we believe, to prevent exacerbating inequalities in the region that already has very high levels of social disparity. It's also, of course, a key topic for EU initiatives such as our Euroclima program, where we strive to assist countries in the region to implement environmental and climate policies. But enough from my side. Let us introduce the panel here with us today. We have with us Mr. Ramon Mendez, is a former National Secretary for Energy and subsequently for Climate Change in Uruguay, and today is director of the association IVY, advising governments and indeed private sector operators on energy questions. Then we have Mr. Medardo Cadena, Director of Studies, Projects and Information at the Latin America Energy Association, LADE. Then we have Ms. Francisca Troncoso. She's Head of Projects, Industry and Markets for Energy Efficiency and Climate Change in the Energy Sustainability Agency of the Ministry of Energy in Chile. And Ms. Gabriela Ayala, who holds a master in environmental sustainability and is working as environmental manager. She will tell us particularly about her experience in the Galapagos Islands. And finally, Ms. Natalia Caldes, national expert for energy and working today here at the European Commission in Brussels in our Directorate General for International Partnerships in the Unit for Energy and Climate Change. Our panelists have all been selected because you're all committed and you all have been working towards promoting a green and just energy transition. However, you've been doing this in different roles, in different institutions, in different countries. So we hope by bringing this together today, we can contribute to a fruitful exchange. Again, my appeal to you, since we have limited time, I would invite speakers to stick to the 5 minutes in the first round. And then with having said all this, I hand over to Ramon with the first question. Ramon, can you please tell us from your experience as Director of Energy in Uruguay, what concrete measures did you put in place to ensure that the transition was not only green, but importantly, also an inclusive one? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Horst, and a pleasure to be here. Perdón, voy a hablar en español, ya que eso fue lo que...
I'm sorry, I will be speaking in Spanish since I pledged to do so. In fact, in Uruguay, we had a complete process of decarbonization and just energy transition. You may know that in Uruguay, 98% of our sources are renewables in the electric grid. And over half are non-commissionable energies. That is wind energy, 15 to 20% of biomass. And we also complete, of course, with wind and hydraulic energy. So we managed to showcase that a system can work almost completely and exclusively with renewables, without any kinds of batteries or energy storage or water pumps. No, just through completing through renewables, several renewables. So we broke this fake paradigm concerning what people said about intermittent energies. There was another false paradigm that we strongly reduced. So talking about price, we have 5 cents of euro per kilowatt hour. And what's most significant, we are completely stabilized. We can control the production of electric energy in the country. Why? Because we realize that having a just energy transition isn't just adding renewables to the electric grid. No, it means to understand that a system, for it to be managed without a high percentage of intermittent energy, we must plan differently, we must operate differently, and the necessary market model so that this may work must be very different from the traditional model in the world. So in other words, our model of planning and our energy model is quite original. We developed it through 3 years, over 3 years, by the academia. And this has allowed us to have all the information within a model, like a century of historical data, plus weeks of forecasting, weather forecasting. And this allows us to understand how we have to combine the different sources to guarantee that at any point we will have the needed energy for the country. Concerning the business model, our system is almost 100% under contract from competitive models where the percentage of every single source is predetermined. The interpreter, sorry, but the sound breaks off. And so we can optimize the general cost of the system. The market is under contract, and this grants us agility. This model is being broadcast throughout the countries of the region. We worked for 3 years with another company to understand the barriers to renewables in the region, and we identified 37 barriers. But we wrote a very positive message with an orientation to build rules toward using renewables throughout the country. And the association that I head is working with several countries, and we're having success. Lastly, transition is something, and then just energy transition is something else and is much more powerful. We managed to include and develop, empower people. More significantly, in Uruguay, 99.9% is electrified. About 1,000 houses, rural houses in the middle of nowhere, have no access to electricity, and that's it. At the same time, due to renewables and our own sources, we have managed to advance the possibilities of development of communities and isolated peoples compared to those that lived in big cities. That's it. That's my first intervention. Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you so much. And you kept perfectly within your time limit. So we are all very pleased with that. Okay, Medardo, over to you. Based on your extensive experience in energy policy, can you please tell us how an organization such as OLADE is contributing not only to the exchange of knowledge, but very specifically also to just transition in the energy sector in the region. Thanks, and over to you.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Un saludo muy cordial a todos.
Thank you very much. I greet you all from our
Bueno, tenemos
offices in Quito, Ecuador. We don't have a lot of time,
unas cifras preliminares sobre la
but I would like to speak about a certain numbers of the situation in Latin America. Okay, I will keep to my time.
inequidades que existen en la región. Pero
You talked about inequalities in the region, but it's also very important to speak about how the region's doing. Okay, 30% of the population in Latin America and the Caribbean is poor, and 11.4%, so about 72 million people in America, Latin America, and the Caribbean is in extreme poverty. Okay, so they don't make enough to respond to their needs. 77 million inhabitants do not have access to clean food, okay? Clean cooking. So that is, they use coal. And several million don't have access to electricity. This is how the region is doing. And our obligation is to leverage these processes of energy transition so that we may reach the decarbonization goals. We need to close these gaps. These are historic gaps. They're not from yesterday. With this introduction, I'm going to focus on the question: what are we doing with OLADE, with Euroclima? We work in energy efficiency, right? Well, we work in all topics, but specifically in Euroclima, within a project that directs
los tomadores de política
the information needed by the governments and policymakers to align their energy efficiency policies based on information, okay? So we see what energy it uses thanks to gathering data locally through surveys with industrial, commercial clients, local clients, and so the governments then, the policymakers and planning makers, get really high quality information, and so they can adequately gear their policies. That's essential. And why? Because according to numbers, the contribution of energy efficiency toward a scenario of neutral emissions toward 2050, it's about 6 to 10%. So energy efficiency is something that we cannot forget about. We must grant tools to the countries so that they can direct their policies very effectively. And energy transition, energy efficiency programs are not about intuition, they're about information. This is why we developed very successful projects in 3 countries: Paraguay, Panama, and the Equator, that have their balance of useful energy, and this has motivated other countries to advance in this kind of tool. And we hope to continue counting with Euroclima support. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Medado. Also, thanks a lot for being on time. And thanks a lot.
Muchísimas gracias.
When we are trying here to contribute to exchange of best practices, that's exactly the type of story we want to hear. When something has worked in a country and we contribute to spreading this information, I think then we've really made an important contribution. So thank you very much. Franziska, given your long professional background in implementation of energy projects, can you tell us a bit about your experience? How does one ensure that the social dimension, so the just transition, is considered adequately in energy projects? Can you give us an example what really has worked or what has failed? Thanks, and over to you.
Hola, Horst. Hola a todos. Muchas gracias por
Hello, thank you very much for the invitation. Well, from the perspective on the work we've been doing between Chile and Argentina in this project, it belongs to the Euroclima program, and it's about mitigating the greenhouse gases in both sectors, in both countries. And there are some examples that allowed us to maintain this just transition element and to enhance it. And in this sense, we have had to adapt to different concepts, to different realities from these two countries, which are very different organizations. But we have contributed to this just transition in specific cases through the support to SMEs. For example, it's very important to listen to the needs of these companies, to give them a companionship activity, which is more technical and in person, to do energetic diagnosis and to be more specific when addresses their needs. We have worked with more than 150 companies that have received certain aid in these projects. For example, in the northeast of Argentina, which are rural areas, and they have had received certain aid in this sense. Sometimes they do not have the possibility to receive the support when it comes to their energy balance. So through this initiative, they were able to receive certain credits with the banks to be able to install solar panels. So the just transition is there in that sense. And also the development of different projects to try to maintain the power grids in these areas, which was very interesting to maintain. There were other cases, for example, that have to do in how we enhance with some projects the illumination in the streets, working with the governments to install intelligent systems so that they can improve the citizens' experience by walking in their cities. Initially, we didn't work with a very specific element. It was just a rule, a norm, but we decided to change it to the need to make it more sustainable, to carry the energetic sufficiency to everybody. And there's other cases in this project that have to do with the cross-sectional coordination and the communication and sustainability, that have to do with all of the public buildings that have installed monitoring systems and electric consumption systems in, for example, certain centers in vulnerable areas that allow to give better care solutions which are enhanced with this process of energetic efficiency. So we were able to reach certain levels through the project. We also work in a training model of giving some trainings when it comes to climate change. And we have been working also to be able to train more than 1,000 people in both countries in a Latin American area to be able to raise awareness on this topic and make the energy efficiency through the just transition to everybody, so that the sustainability is cross-sectional. It's something that we can repeat in different countries. This exchange of knowledge at a national and regional level, it's very complete work. We have worked all together with both countries, and this allowed us to bind different sectors from civil society, public-private collaboration between different countries, between different companies. It's a cross-sectional work. So these are very specific cases that we were able to achieve, and also considering different public policies, different contexts, backgrounds, different policies, frameworks. So this will be the more specific contribution on how we have carried out this transition in both regions.
Okay, thank you very much, Francisca. That was very interesting, and I didn't know that you're also active in outside Chile in this context. So very interesting to hear. Thank you very, very much. Gabriela, over to you. You also have a very long experience in the implementation of energy projects, including in a place, I understand, where most of us dream of going, but very few have been, the Galapagos Islands, right? So can you share also with us from your experience, what have you seen that contributed to ensuring there's a social dimension, this just transition in energy? And what has worked in your experience? And is there anything that has not worked that we can learn from? Over to you.
Buenos días, gracias, Hort. Gracias.
Good morning. Thank you, Courts. Good morning from the Galapagos Islands, from Ecuador. Well, when we talk about just transition in energy projects, we talk about the main beneficiaries of these projects. So this is the community being part of the implementation of the project.
Desde el Consejo de Gobierno
Here in Galapagos, from the Government Council of Galapagos, which is a public entity of the government, we are executing since 2021 a pioneering project in Latin America about sustainable buildings, the Living Lab project about sustainable buildings. So with this project, we want to change the traditional paradigm of construction that we have in Galapagos
gestión sobre los recursos
that creates a huge impact and a pressure in natural resources in the islands. And we're seeking for a transition towards construction, which are energetically sustainable and environmentally friendly. So, how do we include this social component in the project? As I said at the beginning, is we make all of the beneficiaries participating in the project, including them in workshops since the day one of the project, in which they can be part of each of the stages. So the initial side
identificar
was to identify different standout metrics. And we did this together with a community that in the project it was named the agents of the construction chain. This is a group, a learning group, a community group formed by different local actors that are, for example, part of the worker, different professionals, the architects, or the carpenters, the builders, and any other actor that may be interested in the project and they've been part of this process of identifying different standards of sustainable construction. This is one part. So, them being part of this project, we try to enhance different practices in these living labs. And this project is done in the Galapagos Islands. In each of the islands, we have a living lab, a living laboratory,
matriz de estándares las
and these metrics are being applied to each of these constructions. So today we have done by an 80% living lab in Santa Cruz Island. This is a living lab corresponding to a little school
en un aula de clases.
in a class at school.
Implementada edificación social.
So the metrics that we've implemented or deployed in this school is that more than 70% of kids are being part of the benefits of an energy transition. And this is also an example on how are we including the social component and we're creating a direct impact in the education of kids in Galapagos. This matrix that I mentioned before was also a very important part to generate public policies. We have generated different projects of ordinances and different 3 projects that we have in Galapagos Islands. For you, this to know, this is a province in the island side of Ecuador, in Santa Cruz, San Cristobal, and Isabela. And each of these cantons, we have proposed a local norm to promote the sustainable buildings and constructions
Sostenible.
with this inputs of sustainable metrics and a public policy that was built with the community.
Funcionando ahora
So what it's working now in this project of sustainable building is to include the community and the citizen participation so that they are the main actors and the community is the main character to decide to what changes they want to see in their community, how can this be done, and it's also too important to keep the gender perspective in the projects to enhance the participation of women in this project and to make sure that we have every single social and environmental safeguard. And what has not worked from these projects It's more government level. It's the constant rotation of government positions we have in Ecuador, and this makes the institutionality go weaker. And at the end, this affects the community because at the end, the community loses interests, credibility, and this can affect to social inclusion in the projects. So we have to mention this, but we have also some alternatives on how to face the situation. This is what I can tell from the experience we have here with the Living Lab in Galapagos.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. Very interesting. I almost regret we didn't foresee any slides now, because I think we're all curious now to see your buildings and schools. Maybe we can share a link with us that we have some opportunity to about other programs that the European Commission is running. So not only Latin America, but perhaps also elsewhere. And perhaps in her rich experience, there's also some interesting lessons learned that she can share with us. Over to you, Natalia.
Muchísimas gracias, Horst.
Thank you very much, host. Good afternoon to you all. I would like to start saying that from Europe, we are very clear that the energy transition must not only be green, but also fair and inclusive. So in this sense, apart from the efforts that we are conducting in our borders,
Países de América Latina y el Caribe.
we're working, as you know, host within Latin American, Caribbean countries so that this transition allows us to address some of the challenges, for example, the growing inequalities, social inequalities that are happening. So go to your question, host. I would like to mention some examples of actions that we are carrying out to tackle this goal. So first, it will be through a blending program, which is called Latin American Best Facility, through which we are contributing to the rural electrification of indigenous communities from the Enga de Burle in Panama. Collaborating with IFID and the Inter-American Bank of Development, we are not only delivering financial support, but also technical assistance so that the access to energy in these communities, it's a catalyzer of the comprehensive development through doing new activities to generate income, to improve the health systems, education systems, and also Gabriela mentioned the empowerment of women. The second example I would like to mention, it's a program that's called Just Energy Transition in Cold Regions that has as a goal to support actors from carbon areas to this transition to economies based on carbon economies to decarbonized economies according to this agreement of Paris. This program is being deployed in different areas of the population to promote a dialogue and experience exchange with Europe and other actors, and also creating an international platform of experience exchange. And host, you know this very well. I would like to mention two actions of the Euroclima programs in Panama and in Chile, where we are supporting the training and in green hydrogen, so that the future investment in this sector, which is so promising for the regions, can be translated to generating job positions, quality job positions, and new activities that generate income. So this was just a summary of some of the examples that we're doing to support this green and just transition in the region. Thank you so much.
Okay, muchas gracias, Natalia. Very interesting. So just a little overview, right? Obviously, we are doing a lot of things in the European Commission, and we are acting in several countries, either bilaterally or regionally. I think there was quite a good example of some of these activities. I think also in the program you mentioned, the Just Energy Transition, where it's not limited to Latin America, but indeed also a program that tries to compare activities in countries from other regions. I think that's particularly useful that we sometimes look out over the region itself and check what is happening elsewhere. A big compliment to all the speakers so far, because we have been very much in time. So we're starting a second round now. And the second round is basically to say, all right, now we have heard from your experiences. And are there any particular suggestions that you have, very operational ones, each of you, that we could take on, be it in a program such as Euroclima, be it in other newly designed initiatives that we people like us, Natalia and me, may want to conceive in the future? Because of course we are aware that the challenges are huge, that the budgets are very limited, and our challenge is always to see how we can, with the limited resources, achieve a maximum for the benefit of the energy transition and the just energy transition, right? So if you permit me, so we will have now perhaps 3 to 4 minutes per speaker, a bit shorter, and I will pass the floor again to Ramon to say, based on your experience, Ramon, in the various functions that you had, any specific recommendations that come to mind from your side? Over to you.
Creo que Ramón no está conectado, tiene algún problema en conectar.
It looks like Ramon is not connected. Maybe he's experiencing some trouble with connection.
To Medado, right? You obviously are connected, Medado. Over to you, and we're looking forward to hearing from Olare's perspective.
Ok, voy a tomar el tiempo de Ramón.
Okay, I'm going to use my time and Ramon's time. So, many things to say, but I would like to start with the following comments. We are all talking about energetic transition, and it gives us the idea that it's the first time that humanity faces a situation like this. But in the story of mankind, this is the fourth or fifth transition process. If we look back, the first transition process was in the year 1850 with the coal and steam machines. The second one with the petrol around 1915, 1920. And then by mid 20th century, like in the year 50, 60, the greater rise of the energy system with the hydroelectrical companies. So, and by the end of the 20th centuries, we have the sun power energy, the wind power energy, and now we are facing this energy transition process that, compared to the others, that came just by the fact to have new sources of energy systems and energetic development. But the great difference is that today we have goals with a quantity and with a time which are perfectly defined. So the previous transition process did not speak about a temporary goal of reaching zero emissions by a certain year, and never before it was spoken about just energy transition. It's the first time that we link the energy sector with the social development of the countries. So this is a fact that we have to mention and highlight. And from the point of view of Latin America, we must acknowledge that our region is one of the greener regions of the planet. While the renewable participation in the installed capabilities is around 60%, at a global level it reaches the 30%. And from the point of view of primary sources of energy, that means where we take the energy from, our region has the 33% of renewable energy compared to the 13% at a global level. And when it comes to emissions, the energy sector of Latin America only has a 4% of the emissions. This means that nevertheless, this low incidence in global emissions, the responsibility that we assume in our region in this transition process, it's something that we must highlight. But now, we have talked about the inequality levels, the poverty levels. The thing is, what should we do? Because on the other side, we're a region that has a very high poverty levels. We have a very important richness in energy resources. Bear in mind that in Latin America, we have one of the bigger areas of solar radiation at a global level in the Atacama Desert, where we can have radiation levels over more than 300 watts per square meters. Through the Magallanes Strait, we have the biggest wind areas that are over 70% of the forecast. When it comes to water energy, we did not leverage the 70% of the capabilities we have. The energy reservation that we have in our region is huge. The big challenge is has to seize all of this richness from energy sources to walk along this process of transition, trying to
Con esa cantidad
close this gap, this social debt that we have with so many citizens that are still living in poverty situations. How can we do this? To work strong in the development of value chains at a local level to leverage this energy transition to create job positions, job sources that are able to improve their lives and reduce the poverty levels. Another big challenge is has to ensure the costs of transitions do not transform into a barrier to accessing the energy. This is a great challenge for the regulators or the decision makers. They have to work in a way with imagination so that to ensure that the transition is just and fair. And when we talk about fair, it has to be fair for everybody, for the energy developers, for the investors, it has to be fair for the project promoters, but mainly and fundamentally it has to be fair for the population. And it is there where all of us that are participating in this beautiful congress, we have a very important role to play.
Excellent, Medado. Thanks for jumping in, and thanks also for your interesting thoughts on tariffs and the idea that indeed fairness is not only social, but it's also indeed for the operators, the regulators, and a whole range of stakeholders. Thanks a lot. And with the same or similar question, I hand over now to Francisca. Again, I mean, based on your experience as putting energy projects into practice, are there any specific recommendations that you can give us here so that we can take it on board for the designing of future initiatives?
Gracias, Horst. Bueno, sí.
Thank you, Holst. Well, there's a very relevant factor here, and among the formulation of this project in the design stage, it's very important to consider the work with the local actors, with the different communities of the territory, thinking always in a work from the first moment in sustainability, taking into account the results, the specific results that we've been conducting between Chile and Argentina. So when we started this initiative, there were many aspects that we didn't bear in mind, and we saw this along the way since we were doing things, so we had to adapt and readapt
De acuerdo a las contingencias que
and modify certain elements due to the local contingencies on both countries and realities, and also the local realities on how to include the energy transition. So it is very important to maintain this flexibility. So flexibility is a very important recommendation in these matters that can be changing a long time. And the technical team has to consider this and having more specific results. So in our case, when it comes to energy efficiency, in Chile, we have this law of energy efficiency that this can transmit at a technical level. Was transmitted to Argentina, and we could do a work together to be able to work in a more specific way to try to enhance that these projects were copied a long time and repeated. They have some networks on knowledge. We had some complementation of the different energy systems, but this has to be included in the design stage. And for example, the gender approach is something very important. For example, what sources are available for all of us, and also the results and lessons learned. The lessons learned are a very important and key element, and we have to consider from the design stage what results we want to see, and we need to socialize somehow these lessons so that all of the actors and countries involved can repeat the experience, can learn from our experience. We are working in gathering all of these lessons learned to be able to send this to other communities to repeat all of this in other countries.
Con todos los casos concretos que también. Así que creo que eso.
So I think these aspects are key for us, these lessons learned, to bear them in mind. And to, of course, we have to incorporate the social side since the beginning of the projects.
Como la mirada de recomendación que yo podría dar desde la.
This will be the recommendation from the experience that we have had between both countries.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Franziska. Very interesting. Also, of course, we want to hear from Gabriela. Gabriela, based on your experience in Galapagos, are there any obvious lessons to be drawn that we should take on board, either as energy practitioners or indeed as people like Natalia and myself who are trying to conceive the best possible support programs for those of you out there who are trying to put just energy transition into practice? Over to you.
Gracias, Horst. Yo coincido bastante con Franziska.
I agree with Franziska. Energy and transition projects have to guarantee from their design the citizen component part and identifying appropriate mechanisms to empower people in their community so that they can say, oh, this project is very good, it is for us, and it is for the community overall. They also need to count on knowledge management plans that are well designed and planned, including all of the vectors of the project. We have several agents from the public sector, institutions that are in charge of the project with the municipality's technical teams, also the agents of the community, the craftsmen, construction workers, architects, etc. All of them must integrate so that they can all empower one another and can see the benefits and how important is the energy transition for them. Franziska managed the gender aspect, right? These projects need to allow for the participation of women. And this is why we have gender action plans. There are methodologies of how to include women and make roles aware so that neither men nor women are superior to one another, both genders being equal. We also have environmental and social safeguards in projects. They are the key, the guarantee that let us have a just transition. As Medardo was saying, it needs to be just for all. For all in the project, for all outside the project, financiers, everyone who is investing in these energy transition projects in our countries.
Okay, thank you very, very much. That was very interesting as well. And now the final word, the final round goes again back to Natalia, because as I understand, we have still a Ramon missing somewhere out there. So Natalia, could you, based on what you heard here today, but also based on your experience overall, also come up with suggestions to say, how do we, who want to drive forward an energy transition, not only drive forward the rollout of energy projects, but also contribute to making them inclusive, social, because we all want to contribute to a just transition, right? Mm-hmm. So how can we do that? What is your suggestion?
Muchas gracias, Horst.
Thank you very much. I would like to highlight that to advance in this just energy transition, we must not consider the energy sector in an isolated manner. For this to be truly transformative, we need to have a multi-sectorial approach, and this should be translated into an interministerial cooperation. Usually we do work thinking that energy isn't the end in itself. It's just a vector, a transformative vector that will reach other things. We were talking about education and other examples, health as well, beforehand. So when we design an energy policy or a project, it's very important to have an interministerial work and cooperation. That's not a piece of cake, it is an extra challenge, but if we can reach it, then it becomes much more powerful. And it has a much stronger impact in energy projects. I would also like to highlight that on top of this multi-sectorial approach, we must count on the participation of all sectors, the public sector, the private sector, and civil society. This is why I believe that all agents participating means an opportunity, as Medardo was saying. In this energy transition, we want to reach both social and environmental objects. We must believe this. As Gabriela and Francisca, both my colleagues, were saying, this double objective must be considered from the inception, from the conception, the design, the building, the implementation, the indicators, all of the policies and intervention in terms of energy from the public and the private sector. Not only will this drive change, it will create a social acceptance that is much higher, and this will lead to success and a multiplication of the effects, of the social effects.
Okay, muchas gracias, Natalia. This brings us to towards the end of our session. I'm very thankful to all of the speakers. Not only was it very interesting to listen to you, but also you kept very good to your time slots. So I hope that we made a small contribution here today to help us understand how the energy sector can also be striving towards more inclusivity. We have, I believe, in the chat, a link to the study that I mentioned in the beginning. This was a study carried out by two of the Euroclima implementing agencies, by ACID of Spain and AFD of France, who looked at the energy projects that we implemented under the Euroclima program and tried to come to some sort of conclusion also here, what worked and what not. So perhaps another element to be considered. And overall, maybe we see this discussion today as a small contribution to our ambition to drive towards more dialogue, the exchange of best practices, so that we can learn from each other, so we can drive forward this process that's so dear to all of us, basically with the long-term vision, obviously, of providing free, clean energy to all of us to the extent possible. Thank you very much to all the moderators, and we end the session here today. And I wish all of us that this COP will be a positive one with an important outcome for all of us. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, and bye-bye.